time to taste some gin. Thank you first off to all the people that helped doing the pouring, because it's a tricky job to do, and it's very hot out there as well, so thank you to them. So the idea of this tasting is really just to look at what new has happened since many of you were here last year listening to me talking about what had happened since the previous year. So it's really looking at what are the new things. Hopefully there's something in this set that, at least there's one thing here that you've not yet tried. So I'll probably just wait until everyone's got their samples, and then we'll begin. So I guess in the last year, as you may well have heard previously, continues to be a great increase in number of gins that are available, new distilleries opening, but I think one of the other big things that we're seeing is a great increase in limited editions and special editions, and what's quite nice with that is people are really being able to embrace some more of their creativity, and sometimes that's by looking forward, and sometimes that's by looking back at the past, and we kind of have a combination of these things today. So, how are we doing with samples? A few on the front, and okay, I'm missing one bottle as well. I'm sorry? I don't have a PowerPoint, no. No, the gin will speak for itself. For everybody. If it is possible for someone to get a bottle of the first gin for me, please, that would be great, which is the Hernö Swedish Rose. If one of the monitors could check to see if there's a bottle of that, because that's the only one I don't have up front here, so I can't show it to you. Waiting to see, maybe. So it'll arrive, that's fine. Okay, anyway, so we're nearly there. Okay. So so the first one that we've got, and the last ones are just coming through. So that's number one on your chart that we've got there, and that is the Hernö Swedish Rose. This is part of a company which is part of Atom Supplies, which is that boutique gin company. Ah, brilliant. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Which is essentially it's an independent gin bottler, and so this is the Hernö gin here, and this is from the same award-winning Hernö, which is in Dala in Sweden. So it's kind of, it's quite, I mean, it's much further north than Stockholm, but it's still not sort of right at the top north there. So this is a neutral spirit base, and you've got juniper, coriander, and lemon, cassia, and black pepper in there, and meadowsweet. Has anyone actually tasted meadowsweet? Does anyone? Because you see it in gin, and you think, what is this flavour? Does anyone actually? Yeah, it's a little like marzipan. I think that I had some when I was over in. Also, if I could have some samples, that would be great as well. If there's any, if there's any chance, that would be really nice. But otherwise, I should be drinking out of one of the larger glasses. Yeah. So. I tried some, and it was infused. It was basically vodka. Ah, brilliant! Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Cheers. And it had been infused with meadowsweet. And actually, the thing I thought it was closest to was Zubrovka. I thought it was quite, and there's still that's where the marzipan's coming from, but that's kind of that flavour there. So that, and there's lingonberries as well, and that's very much in there. That's what's in their standard gin recipe. But in addition to that, there's rose. And then they also make a juniper cask aged gin, and so they aged some of the neutral spirit in a juniper cask, and then blended a little bit of this back into the final product. So that's the first one that we've got here. And the rose is done through it's done through distillation. So they put it sort of lies on the top of the pot when they do that, and they distill that through. So yes, yeah, that's the Herno one. Yeah, it's gone again. There we go. Never mind. Do have a look at it though, because there's a great looking person on the bottle. So you know. Well, yeah. What are people? I'm intrigued to see what people. Many people have probably tried Herno before, have they? And it's at 46.2, so it's got a reasonable strength to it, and it is still only. It's not quite lunchtime yet, is it? So, but are people picking out things like the rose and those sorts of flavours? Do they seem to come through, or generally, everyone's just got to have a couple more drinks, and then everyone will be a little bit noisier, I think. So, I think that for me that a lot of the rose comes through from the sweetness. I think that's one of the big things that we're getting there. So, so that's the Herno from Sweden. We've then got another one from Boutique Gin, which is, but made by a different distillery. So this is actually made at the Atom Distillery in Tunbridge Wells, and this is the Moonshot Gin, which is this one here. So this is it's a bit of fun. I think that's the main the idea behind it. And so this has botanicals of juniper, coriander, cuba berries, and lemon. And it also has some lunar meteorite, which my understanding is when a meteorite hits the moon, bits sort of fly off and then they enter the Earth's atmosphere. So that's what's going on there. But the real kind of funky thing that's going on, and is partly maybe due to the fact that it was the idea was conceived at like 3 o'clock in the morning in San Francisco when I had quite terrible jet lag, but nevertheless, it was quite a fun idea. You get creative at these sorts of times. But the botanicals have been sent up on one of these weather balloons up into the stratosphere, right up there. And so there's a much lower pressure up there as well. So it's near space. It's not quite into space, and then it has come back down again, and that's the botanicals that we've used to make the gin. And it's by a company called senditintospace.com, which I think is a nice a line there. Because obviously sending botanicals into space is a little bit pricey, that is slightly reflected in the botanical choice that we've got. So we wanted to keep it quite simple, but also botanicals that come through quite strongly as well. So that's kind of a sort of a flip side on that. So that's the Moonshot. I think one of the things I taste quite a lot is the Cuba, but I think that spiciness comes through quite a lot on that one. Thoughts on the Moonshot? Sorry? Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, a little. So I think, as I said, I think it's good fun. I think it's something that gets people talking about things. And I personally don't have any issue with having these sort of creative ideas, but I think that the gin has to back up what you're doing. So that's part of the reason for having this in here, is that I feel that, yes, it's a bit of a crazy idea, and yes, you could say, well, does it make any difference sending it up into space and that sort of thing? But I think that it's kind of fun, it captures the imagination somewhat, but fundamentally the gin behind it is good, and I think that's, as we start to be more creative and more innovative with things, I think that that's something that's really important to remember. Is the most important thing is that the gin is really good, and you can have a fun backstory with it, and you can do some fun and crazy things with it, but as long as the gin's there, and for not to step on the toes of the next discussion, as long as it continues to taste like gin, I think is an important point as well, which I'm sure many of you feel very strongly about. So, yes, so that's the Moonshot. That's 46.6. Sorry? I think it's £35, so it's 500 mils for £35. So it's done in a way that made it relatively accessible. And part of it is also supporting an aspect, I guess, of the British space industry, even though it's sending stuff up onto a weather balloon. That's kind of, because we're kind of doing, we have a partnership with them with that. So, yeah, these guys, they send all sorts of random stuff up into space, and you know, if it inspires a few more people to go into that sort of area, then I think that's all to the good. Teddy bears. I think a lot of schools send teddy bears up into space, and then they come back down again. So there you go. So if anyone wants to send a teddy bear into space, they're the people to speak to. So these are kind of potentially some slightly more, you know, we're looking forward for inspiration. We then move on to number 3, which is the Sipsmith Lemon Drizzle Gin. Here we go here. Exclusive to Marks and Spencer's, but we've got it here, so that's nice. Historically, that you used to have, and it was popular at one time, lemon gins. There was actually a whole variety of a great number of different fruit gins that were around at one time. And Gordon's made quite a popular one, but Plymouth made one, and lots of other people. And often those were made with gin, and then you'd have an infusion of lemon, and there typically would be some sweetness. So this is kind of a modern take on the lemon gin, or at least, I mean, that's kind of what it seems to me, and it's done completely through distillation. So I think that this is quite a nice example of how you can look back to inspire you to do a product going forward. So in here you've got juniper, coriander, and angelica. It's 40.4, and then there's dried Seville orange, and then in the pot and in the vapor still there's fresh lemon, and there's also lemon verbena and lemon myrtle. So this citrus flavour that you get is not just about sticking a load of lemon peel in there. It's about using dried and fresh and different distillation methods, and then some other flavours like lemon verbena, which gives you lemon, but there's a leafiness to it, and there's a slight chocolatiness there, and lemon myrtle as well, which again has this slight green leafiness and then some citrus, to almost create more of a sort of three-dimensional lemon flavour. And I think when you're looking at making gin and you want to maybe have a particular flavour profile, in addition to juniper, obviously, that you want to have there, then I think this is more holistic approach is quite good and stops it from just being a single note that overpowers. But that's I mean, do people feel that you get the complexity there? It seems more than just like a lemon vodka, which I think is a real danger. If you're making a really lemony gin, you could just totally overpower it with the lemon. So I think it's quite soft and quite sippable, quite easy to drink there. There we go. Okay. So, any questions so far as we're going along? Yes. I actually think, because, and this is what I personally quite like with this particular gin. I think it works really nicely with soda water, because I think there's quite a lightness and a freshness with it, and potentially with a tonic with more sugar in it, that might be a bit heavy, but just something, lots of ice and, you know, some sparkling water or soda water or something like that, I think creates a very bright and light drink. I think also you can afford to potentially be a little bit more generous with the soda than you possibly would be with a gin and tonic, so maybe you can look at maybe even doing like a 4-to-1 or something like that. So that's bringing down like the strength of your drink to about 8 or 10%, something around those sorts of lines. And I think actually, in some respects, that's quite nice. You can imagine that quite nice of an afternoon when it's a bit hotter. You don't want lots and lots and lots of alcohol, but you want just a little something to ease you into the evening. And I think maybe that might be something that you would look at doing that with. I'm personally quite a fan. I mean, I think gin and tonic is great as well, but I'm quite a fan of gin and soda as a lighter and fresher alternative, and a different way to enjoy the gin as well. Okay, so that's the lemon drizzle. And then we now move on to something completely different, which is the new product from Hendrick's, which is the Orbium, which we've got here, which is their quininated gin. Anyone tried this before? One person. What? That's a surprise, but there we go. Well, that makes me rather happy that most people haven't tried this before. It's at 43.4. This, I think, is fair to say, rather than being like a totally different gin, I mean, because if you think of something like Hendrick's, it has a distinctive flavour profile that many, many, many people are already familiar with. And so there is a challenge for someone like Hendrick's, if they wanted to release another gin, how can you do that without losing those things that are so iconic about that particular product? So this is kind of the result of doing that, and it's taken a lot of time and effort to get it to where it is, and it's really more of a sort of, almost a bit like a sort of evolution of the Hendrick's rather than something totally out of the blue new. So it's 43.4, and I think I'll just let you have a little taste of it and see what you think first, and then I'll talk a little bit more about what we've got here. Anyone going to be bold and give some thoughts? Yeah. Fruity, yeah, I get that, definitely. I think there's a succulence to it that's going on there. Anything, now you've all had a taste on the finish, is anyone getting, what are you sort of getting right on the final of the finish? Dry. And a slight bitterness, which is the almost like you've just had a bit like you've just had a gin and tonic almost, you know, it's that, and that's the quinine that you're getting through there. So you've got the standard botanicals of juniper, coriander, angelica, lemon, orange, and orris, those 6 which are in so many gins. They are really like the standards. Then you've got caraway and cubeb and chamomile and elderflower, yarrow, and the cucumber and the rose. And then in addition to that, you've got quinine and wormwood. And the reason for those 2 is that wormwood is such a key ingredient in dry vermouth, which is a key ingredient for the martini, and quinine is such a key ingredient, is the key ingredient in tonic water, which is the gin and tonic. So it's about kind of sort of looking at those 2 really iconic gin drinks. And that's, if any time, you know, if I'm tasting a gin, I'm reviewing it or anything like that, I need to taste it in those before I can give you a proper response. I mean, the 4 are trying on its own in a gin and tonic, in a martini, and in a Negroni, and only then can I feel like I've got a handle on exactly what a gin can do. And it is quite surprising how much the gin you choose makes a difference in a Negroni. Given that it's Negroni week as well, we've got to kind of get that in there. But because you think Campari and red vermouth have such strong flavours, and you think, the gin, it wouldn't even really make too much difference. But sometimes I find when I'm writing notes, I have the most to write about the Negroni, other than on its own, I have the most to write about the Negroni, which is quite surprising, really. But something to consider. So you've got those 2. And then in addition to that, just to sort of bring it all together and round it out nicely, there is Blue Lotus in here as well, which I've never heard of any other gin using that. Even that many gins that are out there, I still haven't heard of anyone using that. And no one's putting their hand up to correct me, which I'm very pleased about. So and I think some of that flavour is, I think that's part of what's giving it that slight sort of plump, peachy element, along with the cucumber and the rose that you've got in there anyway. So, so quite interested at some point to try that with some soda, because I'm quite intrigued, because you've already got that quinine built into it. I'm interested to see how much of, I imagine it will taste quite a lot like a much lighter, crisper sort of gin and tonic, which I think is quite pleasant, actually. Certainly other gins that have got quinine incorporated, often that's what comes through. Right. So we then move on to, you guessed that that one of them was missing, right? I think you got that. Well done, everyone. So we now move on to, let me check first. Number 6, great. So this is the Hayman's Cordial Gin that we have here. So people that have spoken to me before and maybe heard me speak on the subject know that I've done, I'm quite interested in aspects of gin history, particularly the time in the 19th century around the introduction of the column still, because I think that's made I mean, there's all the things with the gin acts and stuff, and there's other people that will talk to you at great length about those, but actually just the way that production has changed is really the thing that interests me a lot. So and at that time, and doing some research and looking at old newspapers and things like that, old newspapers are one of the best forms of research, especially adverts. And some people are so helpful with what they put in their adverts. Back in the day, you can find out so much. So this is essentially a recreation of a 19th century cordial gin. And it's designed so that the botanicals complement the little bit of sweetness that's in there. So it's not about trying to mask any impurity in the quality of what the production is, which is more what Old Tom is about. It's about trying to hide something that's not necessarily so great. Whereas this is more about the fact that by this time people did have a taste for a slightly sweeter style, but there is a way that you can use a botanical mix to complement that, and you almost kind of use that little extra sweetness that you get as another part of the botanical. So you've got juniper and coriander and angelica, and then you've also got things like cassia and cinnamon and nutmeg, and those are the things that I think work quite well with the sweetness, because they often give a slightly natural sweetness anyway to the gin, and so then adding a little bit of sweetness in addition to that, I think rounds it out quite nicely. When I was looking and doing the research about the cordial gin, I found that typically there were two strengths, and there was one which was more for sipping and there was one that was for mixing. But when we're looking at making something like this, that's why 42 was chosen, because we're kind of in the middle. So you can use it for sipping, and I think it's very, very easy to drink, and you can also use it for mixing. I think it's fantastic just with a bit of lime juice, so kind of like a gimlet variation. I just think it's really great. And I think like a little bit of citrus just to give it that crispness, but just nice, simple mixing. I think it's really nice with. Needless to say, I think the 2 bottles I have been drunk, so that's and the subsequent bottle that I purchased. So there we go. So that's the cordial gin. And I mean, do people? Sippable, easy to drink. I think the sweetness is subtle enough that it doesn't become too cloying. It's not like drinking a liqueur or anything like that. 42%, yeah. And I think there's a nice intensity with the botanicals, so I think you can taste a lot of the different things going on. Certainly, I think like the orange peel and that sort of thing comes through as well. How are we doing for time? What time am I meant to finish? 15:15. Is that right? 10 past, that's fine. Is that 10 past including questions? Right, so 5 minutes then and 5 minutes for questions, great. Okay, so that's that one. So that, again, that's looking to history to inspire a product for now, but obviously using modern techniques and things like that. So we now move on to number 7, which is Big Gin Barrel Rested, which is from Captain Spirits in Seattle. Some people might have tried this before, but I think it's worth revisiting again because I've not seen it around for a little while, and I think people that might not have been to earlier Ginposiums or tastings and things like that might have easily missed it. This was the winner of the IWSC Contemporary Gin Trophy in 2014. So it's their standard big gin, which has been aged. And the big gin has juniper, coriander, angelica, orange grains of paradise, cassia, cardamom, and Tasmanian pepperberries as well, which are, they're a type of peppercorn. I think probably the closest thing I can think is they're a bit like a grain of paradise or a cuba berry. They have a slight menthol element to them, but they also have a pepper as well. And then it is aged for 6 months in ex-Heaven Hill casks. And they just put the gin straight in. So like there's probably still like a bit of bourbon left in there. It's ex-Heaven Hill bourbon casks. So that is giving you some of that slight spice, vanilla, slight oakiness as well. Interestingly, given Seattle, which does have, it does rain a lot in Seattle, but there is quite a range of temperatures. So in theory, depending on where those 6 months were, that would make a difference to what the flavour would taste like. If it was 6 months starting in March, then I think the flavour would be different to 6 months starting in October. The one that was aging over the winter, I think would be much, much lighter in flavour, and probably you might get more of the orange coming through than the one in the summer, the maturation would happen much more quickly, and so one of the noticeable things would be probably the gin would be darker, but also the wood influence would be more felt, and I think you'd have a lot more spice and things like that in there as well. So, yes, and that's 47%. And then we finish off with something else that's a bit of fun. That's the big gin, by the way, for those that want to have a look. So we finish off with the spit roasted pineapple gin. Indeed. Not a name that I came up with. So this is essentially a pineapple that was put on a rotisserie sort of spit and cooked so it caramelized with some demerara sugar, and then that was infused with some other bits for the gin. So it's a relatively classic recipe: juniper, coriander, angelica, lemon, orris, and orange. Again, those 6, very common, those 6 come up. Then licorice, cinnamon, cassia, and nutmeg. And then, of course, you've got the pineapple there. It's very sticky, which is why I was a little bit late, because I had to sort that out. But this is the pineapple gin. Well, exactly. Where's my hat? Yes. Interestingly, despite the fact that a spit roasted pineapple gin seems pretty crazy and fun, but crazy, there is some historical precedent for pineapple flavoured gin. There was a brand called, what was it called? I think it's something like, it was like a 7 o'clock after dinner. It's very similar to After 8 in the mints, but it wasn't quite that. And it was a pineapple flavoured gin that they did, which I think would have been done purely through infusion. And I think that probably, it was American. I think it's probably from around about the 50s. There was quite a few interesting American gins that they had, including, as many people might have already heard of, the asparagus infused gin, which was made in San Francisco. And there was also a maple gin, which was made in Buffalo, New York as well. But that was pre-prohibition and came with a load of supposed health benefits as well, which is it pretty much cured most things that you can think of. So yeah, and so that's that one. I think I was trying to think what I'd had it with that I really liked. It was really nice with just like some sparkling wine, just a bit of that and sparkling wine to top it up, as I had last week when it was it British Sparkling Wine Week last week? Whenever it was an excuse. It goes quite nicely with Coke as well, cola, which I know some people are a bit, yeah, oh, what's going on here? Fever Tree, of course, Fever Tree, good, nice quality stuff. I sort of did it was a bit like a white lady, a bit like a daiquiri. I mean, with so many cocktails, when you change one ingredient, it's like, well, what does it become? But I made it essentially to a daiquiri recipe, but I made it with this instead of rum. And I thought that worked really nicely, actually. Knowing that it works well with the pineapple rum that Plantation make, I thought I would try that, and that was a really nice, because you've got the sweetness and you've got the complexity of the pineapple, but then you've got that little tartness of the lime as well. So, and that's 40.1. So those are the gins. Apologies that it's been a little bit chaotic, but, you know, these things are as they are.